The Becker BK2. There's a lot of blades out there that I don't care for. There's a lot of knives that I don't think are that great. And as a knife maker, I do prefer my own blades. But today we're going to take a look at a knife that I do like and I think is a great product. The Becker BK2 is a mighty fine product with a plastic sheath that is very durable. You can count on this blade to stay in place. If you have to shovel snow, or fight off imaginary beasts during a schizophrenic attack. Just kidding. But in all seriousness, this knife will stay even when unbuttoned fairly well. The metal fixtures on this sheath do a good job of holding it all together. The belt loop isn't anything to brag about, but it is fairly durable as well. The snap button is just a regular standard old snap. Once undone, with some firm pressure applied by the thumb, you can pop the sheath right off with one hand, which is nice because when this knife is hanging at your waist and you give it a hard tug, it can take quite a bit of force just to pull it out without putting opposing force on that plastic sheath. Let's look at the knife. An extremely well-shaped handle, very comfortable. It fills up your hand, maybe even a little too much, but still very comfortable and contoured. The blade is coated in a black Cerakote finish. This coating stays on decently well, although it will wear with time. As you can see, mine has been down the road a time or two. I've thrown this blade many times to never have a break, and I've put it through some pretty dang challenging tasks without having it fall apart on me. This blade is 1/4 of an inch thick 1095 steel. It has a saber grind that reaches only halfway across the blade at the widest parts. Has a sharpening choil. The spine is not too squared off, which means striking a fire steel with this item may not go super well. But the point of this blade is durability, which is one of the reasons why the fine people at KABAR decided to make this thing so thick. In performance, the blade will carve up wood decently well. The obtuse grind allows for some decent wood cutting tasks. Its ability to take an edge is very good. 1095 steel will take a pretty darn good edge. And even though this knife does have a lower temper, it will hold a pretty decent edge. And when this knife does go dull, that lower temper means that resharpening it is not going to be the biggest headache in the world. To break this knife would be no small feat. With its lower temper, its saber grind, its thickness, and all the features that make it uniquely the Becker BK2, this blade can be counted on in very adverse conditions. So now that we know a little bit more about the knife and what it is, how it's shaped, and some of what it has to offer, what is it that I like specifically? I like the idea behind this knife. Around the time that I bought this, every knife that I had broken, and the big thing I wanted was just something I would never need to replace. So I bought this knife, and I have beat it up a lot. If you look, you can see plenty of wear and tear on this thing. And I think this knife is great. It has what I would call contextual greatness. Much in the way that when you think of a great athlete like Michael Jordan, he's one of the greatest athletes of all time within the context of his sport.
And while he's a terrific athlete, there's lots of sports that we never saw him play or he didn't really excel at. This knife is great at what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be an unbreakable knife that you can just really be rough with, and is meant to be comfortable in the hand, and is meant for heavy tasks. It chops really comfortably for its size, and it chops really well for its size, being as short as it is. And yeah, it's pretty darn hard to break one of these things. But the drawbacks. So what eventually led to me not caring for this blade is that it's a bit too obtuse and thick behind the edge. When I took it out to use to skin game with, it just wasn't comfortable at that task. The sheath is a fine sheath for what the knife is intended to be, but the sheath is a little bit floppy. Now, its edge retention is so-so from the factory. This thing has a kind of an obtuse edge to it even. I've had to rework the edge on this to an angle that I would like more. And so for my tasks where I do a lot of activities that fall outside of the things that make this knife great, it's thick all the way around, it's obtuse all the way around. It doesn't hold the longest edge. When it comes to resharpening it, it is fairly time consuming in the resharpening, just because once you get the edge work back a little bit, the knife is just so thick that there's more metal to remove. So while it might be easier to refresh the edge, it pays you back with the time later on when it comes to resharpening it. Now, that being said, who is this knife for? This knife is for, I think, the person that really wants an unbreakable knife that's going to last, that they don't have to worry too much about. And I think that it can fit into that category very comfortably. I think there's some knives that do it a little bit better, but this one does pretty decent. And while it may not be my favorite knife, I do put this in the category of being a pretty great knife. It's about $100 most of the time, sometimes it's less. So as far as knives go, there's a lot of blades out there that are more expensive, and it really is a tough knife.
And so with all that being said, the only note that I will add is that 1095 steel is not very resistant to rust, so moisture can be an enemy of this blade. With a minor amount of attention to maintaining it and just keeping it dry, I haven't had any issues. It is a great product in my opinion. When you consider all that it has to offer, the sheath, the durability, and the simplicity of it, in my opinion, I think this is a pretty great knife.